I'm Jack Macaulay Johnson. I'm studying law. It's my first year. Today I'm going to be talking about RuthFirst. She actually fought for the rights of black men and women in South Africa. RuthFirst and her family were actually communists, and they joined the South African Communist Party. And this kind of Communist Party was actually in a kind of loose alliance with something called the National Congress. And this was just basically a coalition that directly opposed the policies of apartheid South Africa, particularly the ones that segregated black and whites from each other. RuthFirst engaged in quite a lot of protests, really. Specifically, I know that when she was a student at the university in South Africa, she joined, or founded actually, one of something called, I believe, the Progressive Students League. And this is kind of where she learned that issues on campus at university reflect the issues in South Africa. So this is kind of where her activism began. She kind of became more disillusioned with the South African government and began kind of creating these sorts of organizations that kind of directly opposed South Africa, or the government at the time. She was arrested and charged with treason. So RuthFirst, along with 156 other members of the National Congress, were ultimately acquitted in this trial after 4 years. But unfortunately, it didn't end there for RuthFirst. The government, after the Sharpeville massacre, where tens of black protesters were shot down by South African security forces, they decided to crack down yet again on these kind of opposition leaders, and she was detained for 117 days. And they infringed on her human rights regularly. They did sensory deprivation. She was actually exiled from the country. And she went to the UK. Originally, I think she went to Manchester and she studied as a lecturer there. But then in 1973, she moved to Durham, where she lectured on social studies and development studies. Ultimately, she decided to leave the university in 1978. She went to the main university, I think Maputo University in Mozambique. Even after she was exiled from the country, she kind of continued trying to influence the politics of South Africa, even indirectly with her kind of lectures outside of Africa, and eventually her lectures in Mozambique, which was very close to South Africa. Her death was caused by South Africa, or its security forces, in the way of a parcel bomb, which she opened at the University of Mozambique, killing her. Craig Williamson was the man who was responsible for the killing of RuthFirst. And the only reason we kind of know about that is because of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, this kind of desire for the government to kind of get the truth of the kind of immoral acts of the apartheid state. And so they effectively created this commission in order to kind of allow for these people who had committed these illegal acts to kind of come forward on their own terms. And the only way they could actually do that is if they granted amnesty to anyone who came forward. And this was, in essence, to basically kind of convince them, because if they were found out and they hadn't come forward, then they would be prosecuted under the laws of the state.
I was an officer in the security forces. The security forces, I was in a particular section, the role of which was to carry out counter-revolutionary actions against the ANC and other organizations. I did my job.
When Craig Williamson went forward and confessed that he had indeed murdered RuthFirst, her family was deeply disappointed, because it's one thing getting the truth, but once you want the truth, you want justice as well. And so him kind of not being prosecuted was quite a sore kind of moment for the family.
If you feel that you committed certain acts which make you vulnerable to prosecution, but you're offered a way to deal with this personal problem, personal legal problem, then you have to make your decision as to whether you have a problem which has to be dealt with or not.
I believe that the government kind of had to consider ways in which it could actually move forward into the future. And if you look at this Amnesty Act in a vacuum, you would probably think it immoral, or at least does not give justice. But considering the kind of political atmosphere at the time and the wishes of its government to kind of move forward and not be constricted by its past, I believe it was reasonable to create this amnesty in order to kind of understand and know the truth before one can move on.